This is my true story. I worked hard every day to provide for my family, and I trusted my wife with all my heart. I also trusted my closest friend, the man who lived next door. I thought loyalty lived in my home and friendship. But one day, I discovered a betrayal that cut me from both sides, my wife and my friend together. I stood at his party and exposed them by playing their own calls. Before I share what happened, tell me where you are watching from and the time right now. Please subscribe so my story can reach more people. From the earliest years of my marriage, my heart was built on devotion. I lived my life for my family, and every step I took was guided by duty and love. Each morning, I rose before the sun, putting on my work clothes and heading out while the world still slept. I worked long hours, often until my body ached and my hands felt heavy, but I never complained. My only thought was to give my wife a life of comfort, to build a home where she felt safe, loved, and cared for. I wanted her to know that she never had to worry, because I would carry the weight for both of us. Every coin I earned was turned into food, clothes, or savings for the future. I believed this was the purpose of a man, to protect, to provide, and to love without holding back. Alongside my devotion to her, I had a friend who lived just next door. He was more than a neighbor. He was like family. Someone I trusted with my secrets, someone I broke bread with. We would often sit together, talking about life, sharing meals, sharing struggles, and even laughing about the small troubles of the world. My trust in him was complete, the kind of trust a man rarely gives twice in his lifetime. I thought my wife respected him as a friend, nothing more. He had his place in my life as a brother in spirit, and I believed that bond could never be touched by betrayal. I believed my wife shared my values of loyalty and respect. She had stood beside me in the early days when I was still building myself up. I told myself that she, too, believed in marriage as a sacred bond, something that should never be broken. For years, I carried this belief without a shadow of doubt. When I looked at her, I saw the woman I had promised to cherish. When I looked at him, I saw the friend I thought I could lean on until the end of my days. Together, they were part of the world I built and trusted with my whole being. In those years, I never questioned their actions. My days were filled with labor, and my nights were filled with the small joys of family. I did not search for lies because I believed there were none. I did not look for betrayal because I thought loyalty ran deep in their hearts. Every time I saw them speak, I told myself it was only friendship, nothing more. My devotion blinded me, but I did not mind, because to me, love and trust were the foundation of a man's life. This devotion was not just about work and providing. It was about sacrifice. There were times when I denied myself the small pleasures so that my wife could have more. If there was a choice between my comfort and her happiness, I always chose her happiness. If there was a choice between rest and work, I always chose work because I thought it was for her. Even my friend next door, I supported when he was in need. If he lacked money, I helped. If he lacked food, I shared. I thought this was the way a man should live, giving without keeping score. My wife and my friend were two pillars in my life. One was my heart, the other was my brother in spirit. Together, I thought they made my life whole. Never once did I imagine they could become the very source of my deepest wound. To me, devotion was everything. I gave it without holding back, expecting loyalty in return. I believed that my giving was enough to hold their loyalty firm. But devotion can blind a man. It can make him see what he wants to see instead of what is truly there. That blindness was my downfall, though I did not know it then. Even as years passed, I did not waver. My work grew harder, my body older, but my devotion stayed strong. I wanted to build a future where my wife would never worry about security. I wanted to grow old, knowing that the friend I trusted would always stand by my side. That was my picture of life. That was my dream. And I believed, without question, that this dream was real. But devotion, when not returned, becomes a chain. A man can pour everything out of his heart, but if those he loves do not value it, his devotion becomes wasted strength. I did not know that the woman I loved was drifting away, not toward me, but toward the man I trusted most. I did not know that my sacrifices were being mocked behind closed doors. I did not know that my faith and friendship was about to shatter like glass. Still, before the storm broke, my life was marked by simple devotion. Every coin, every hour, every act of sacrifice came from a place of love. I thought it was enough. I thought it would always be enough. But devotion alone cannot protect a man from betrayal. It can only show the depth of his love, and the depth of the wound when that love is thrown away. That was my devotion. Pure, strong, unshakable. And it became the very reason the betrayal that followed cut me so deep. It began with small things, the kind that most people might ignore. At first, I told myself it was nothing, but deep inside, a quiet voice started to whisper. My wife's smile changed when she spoke with the neighbor. It was not the smile I saw every day. It was softer, brighter, and it lingered longer. When she looked at him, her eyes seemed different, as if they carried a spark I had not seen in a long time. I brushed it aside, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, she was my wife, and he was my friend. Trust blinded me, and I chose not to see what was right in front of me. Soon, I noticed she had reasons to visit his house more often. She would step out with baskets of food or little errands, saying she was just being neighborly. Sometimes she claimed she was helping his family. Sometimes she said she needed to borrow something. The visits became frequent, almost a routine, and though it stirred unease in me, I silenced it with trust. I told myself this was kindness, not betrayal. A man in love will explain away even the most obvious signs because the heart does not want to believe. Their conversations grew longer, filled with laughter that seemed too familiar. I would hear them talking over the fence or sharing jokes at gatherings, their voices carrying a closeness that went beyond simple friendship. She laughed harder with him than she ever laughed with me. At times their eyes would meet and linger just a second too long, but I told myself it was nothing. I convinced myself that my wife was loyal and my friend was true. I chose blindness because seeing the truth would mean breaking my own heart. I noticed changes at home, too. She became more secretive with her phone, turning the screen away from me whenever messages arrived. Sometimes she would step outside to answer calls, speaking in a hushed tone, her face hidden from my view. When I asked why, she brushed it off as family matters or simple errands. I believed her, because that is what trust does. It creates excuses where none should exist. Each time I doubted, I silenced myself, because I wanted to believe that the world I built was still safe. The neighbor, too, began acting differently. He visited more often, sometimes for no reason at all. He would show up at odd times, pretending it was casual, but staying longer than necessary. I began to sense a closeness between them, a comfort that did not sit right with me. Yet, I still convinced myself that nothing was wrong. I told myself they were just friendly, that I was imagining shadows where there was only light. But the unease inside me grew heavier with each passing day. Doubt is like a seed. At first, it is small and easy to ignore. But once planted, it grows quietly, pushing its roots deeper until it cannot be removed. My doubts grew each time I saw her smile in a way that was not meant for me. They grew each time she left the house with excuses, each time she lingered too close to the man next door. I wanted to silence the doubt, but it had already taken root. There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. I would remember the way she once looked at me with love and compare it to the way she now looked at him. The difference was clear, but I fought against it. My heart wanted to believe in loyalty, even when my eyes showed me betrayal. That battle between heart and mind was a torture I carried in silence. Friends and neighbors sometimes made small comments. They noticed her laughter with him. They noticed how often she was at his house. Their words planted more doubt in me, but I laughed it off, pretending not to care. I told myself people always talk, and I should not listen. Deep inside, though, their words echoed in the empty spaces of my trust. Still, I refused to act. I told myself a man must trust his wife, and a man must trust his friend. To question them felt like betraying them myself, so I ignored the unease, burying it under routines of work and daily life. I held on to trust even as it slipped through my fingers. But doubt, once it grows, does not die. It waits, it lingers, and it sharpens the pain that is yet to come. Those subtle doubts were the beginning of my downfall. They were the cracks in the wall I had built with love and loyalty. I did not know it then, but the truth was already waiting, hidden in shadows. My heart chose blindness, but the day would come when I could no longer ignore the light of betrayal shining through. The truth always finds its way out, no matter how carefully people try to bury it. For me, the truth came in small pieces, like broken glass scattered across the floor. At first, it cut lightly, almost invisible, but the pain grew sharper with every step I took. My wife thought I was blind, and maybe I was, but no man can stay blind forever. The signs became too clear, too loud, and too heavy to ignore. One evening, she told me she was going to visit her sister. Normally, I would have believed her without a second thought, but something in her voice trembled. It was not the tone of a wife speaking to her husband. It was the tone of a woman hiding something. She dressed with more care than usual, choosing a perfume she had not worn in years. I watched her leave, and doubt burned inside me stronger than ever. Hours passed, and she did not return. I sat alone in the dark, waiting, my mind racing with questions I did not want to answer. The next morning, I noticed her phone carelessly left on the table. She rarely left it behind. I should have respected her privacy, but curiosity and pain pushed me past that line. With trembling hands, I picked it up and scrolled through the messages. What I found made my chest tighten. Hidden among ordinary chats was a thread filled with words no wife should write to another man. They were sweet, secret, and heavy with emotion. My eyes blurred as I read, realizing those messages were not meant for me. They were meant for the man next door, my so-called friend. It felt as if the ground had vanished beneath me. My heart pounded, my breath grew heavy, and my hands shook so badly that the phone almost slipped from my grip. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself I was dreaming, but the words were there in plain sight. She called him by names she never called me. She laughed in her text the same way she laughed when she stood beside him. It was betrayal written in letters and emojis, simple yet cruel. I could not confront her immediately. My heart was too weak, my voice too trapped in sorrow. I pretended nothing had happened, but inside I was drowning. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was real or just an act. Every time she touched my hand, I wondered if she wished it was his. Love became poison, and trust turned into a blade that cut deeper with every thought. Days later, I decided to test the truth. I left work earlier than usual and walked quietly back home. As I approached the house, I heard laughter, hers and his, floating through the air. They were in the backyard, standing too close, speaking in voices that carried secrets. I stood still, hidden by the corner wall, and listened. Their words were not clear, but their tone was enough. It was the same tone I once shared with her when our love was young. My heart cracked at that moment because I could no longer pretend. That night, I confronted the mirror instead of her. I looked at myself, an old man with weary eyes, asking how I could have been so blind. How could I, a man who built a life of loyalty, be betrayed under my own roof? I clenched my fists, but no anger came, only sorrow. Because when love turns into betrayal, the anger does not always rise first. It is the heartbreak that comes like a storm. The truth deepened when I overheard one of their calls. She had gone into the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, speaking softly. She thought I was asleep, but the thin walls carried her words. I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. Her gentle, "I miss you," whispered to him, not to me. My chest ached so hard, I pressed my palm against it, as if I could hold my heart together. At that moment, I knew the hidden truth was no longer hidden. Still, I stayed silent. I did not confront her that night, nor the next. I carried the weight in silence, letting the truth carve me from inside. I watched them laugh. I watched her sneak away. I watched him act like nothing was wrong when he greeted me with false friendship. Every handshake from him felt like poison. Every smile from her felt like a dagger. But I said nothing because I was waiting. Waiting for the right moment when the truth would not only break me, but also expose them both for what they truly were. The hidden truth was now a shadow in my home. It followed me into every room, every thought, every dream. I could no longer escape it, and I could no longer deny it. My wife, the woman I gave my heart to, was already gone. And my friend, the man I trusted like a brother, had stolen her away in silence. Betrayal had moved into my life, and it was not leaving. When you carry betrayal in your chest, it feels heavier than any stone. I did not scream. I did not shout. I did not even confront her in those first days. Instead, I suffered in silence. Every night became a battlefield between my heart and my thoughts. Sleep left me. My bed turned into a cold place where I lay staring at the ceiling, remembering every smile, every lie, every moment I had trusted her blindly. The woman I once loved with all my heart had shared herself with another man, and that man was the very friend I once called a brother. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, listening to the sound of her breathing beside me, wondering if she was dreaming of me or of him. I wondered if her heart still belonged in my home or if it had already moved next door. Sometimes she would turn in her sleep and place her hand on mine, and it made me sick inside because I no longer knew if that touch meant love or guilt. I closed my eyes, but instead of peace, I saw images of them together, laughing, whispering, stealing the trust I had built over decades. During the day, I pretended. I went to work, greeted neighbors, smiled at friends, and played the role of a man whose life was steady. But inside, I was broken. My chest carried an invisible weight, pressing harder with every passing hour. Even when I ate, food had no taste. Even when I sat in front of the TV, my mind was not in the room. It was trapped in the betrayal, replaying every sign I had ignored, every moment I had brushed aside as harmless. I remembered all the times I had trusted them both. I had invited my friend into my home countless times, shared meals with him, poured drinks, laughed, and opened my heart. I remembered the times I had defended my wife in conversations, saying she was loyal, saying she was pure. All those memories now felt poisoned. They were not warm anymore. They were daggers, reminding me of my blindness. The people I valued most had turned my loyalty into a joke. There were moments when I wanted to confront them, to scream, to tear everything apart. But I held it inside. I knew if I spoke too soon, they would deny it, twist it, and make me look like a jealous old fool. And I refused to let them win with lies. So, I stayed quiet, letting the pain carve itself deeper, because I knew silence could be my weapon. I chose to bleed in silence rather than waste my breath on empty arguments. Each night as I lay awake, I thought about my life. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the years of work, the gray hair on my head, the wrinkles on my face. I thought about how I had given everything, love, time, money, loyalty, only to be rewarded with betrayal. It broke me. Some nights, tears rolled down my cheeks, silently, unseen, unfelt by anyone but me. The pillow carried my sorrow, but my heart carried even more. But with every tear, something changed. My sorrow slowly began to harden. Pain became fuel. Betrayal became a fire. I realized that while they were enjoying their lies in secret, I was building something stronger, resolve. I would not let them bury me in silence. I would not let them walk freely while I carried the chains of heartbreak. If they wanted to play with shadows, I would bring them into the light. I started to collect every sign, every proof. I replayed her late-night calls in my mind, remembered the words I overheard, the messages I read. Each piece of betrayal became a stone in the foundation of my plan. I was no longer just a broken man. I was a man preparing to rise. My silence was not weakness anymore. It was strategy. But still, the nights were cruel. My chest often felt like it was tearing apart. Sometimes I walked outside in the middle of the night, standing under the cold stars, asking myself why life had punished me this way. Why did my loyalty bring me only pain? Why did the woman I loved and the man I trusted both decide to destroy me? I had no answers, only silence. But that silence kept whispering one thing in my ear: endure and strike when the time is right. As the days turned into weeks, I no longer looked at them with love. When my wife smiled, I saw deception. When my friend waved at me across the fence, I saw betrayal. They had both dug their own graves, and I was simply waiting for the right moment to let the world see it. My suffering became my shield. My heartbreak became my weapon. Silent suffering is not easy. It eats you from the inside. It makes you question your worth. It makes you doubt the value of love and friendship. But it also teaches you patience. And in that patience, I found the strength I did not know I still carried. They thought they were clever, hiding in the shadows, but I was already preparing the light that would burn their lies away. When the pain hardened into resolve, I knew silence was no longer enough. My suffering had lasted long enough, and if I continued to bury it, it would consume me completely. I needed to act, but I also knew I had to be smart. A private confrontation would only lead to more lies. They would deny, twist, and make me look like the villain. I had lived too long, worked too hard, and given too much to allow them to rewrite the truth. So I began to plan. Not with anger, but with cold patience. My revenge would not be violence. It would be exposure. The first step was proof. Proof is stronger than words, stronger than accusations, stronger than screams. Without proof, betrayal hides in the shadows. With proof, it cannot escape the light. I already had some evidence: the late-night call logs, the recorded whispers I had captured one evening when I left the recorder on. But I needed more. So, I began to watch. I began to listen. Every time she slipped away to the next house, every time I heard the low sound of her voice when she thought I was asleep, I paid attention. I became silent but sharp, like a hunter waiting for the right moment. I started saving everything: screenshots of her messages, records of her calls, even notes of times when she claimed to be elsewhere but was not. Slowly, I built a file, not on paper, but in my mind, in my phone, in my hands. This was not a collection of suspicions. It was a collection of facts, and facts, when revealed, destroy lies. The second step was choosing the stage. Revenge is not only about what you do, it is about when and where you do it. If I confronted them in my house, they would twist it, laugh, maybe even deny until the end. But if I chose the right place, in front of the right people, they would have no escape. I thought long and hard. Then the idea came. The party. My friend, the neighbor, loved gatherings. He enjoyed showing off, inviting people, being the center of attention. His next party would be the stage, and on that stage, his mask would fall. I imagined it carefully. He would invite everyone: family, friends, neighbors, colleagues. He would smile, laugh, shake hands. My wife would be there, standing close, pretending loyalty. And I would stand among them quietly, as if I were just another guest. But when the moment was right, I would bring out my weapon: not a gun, not a knife, but their own voices. The recordings of their betrayal. Their whispers turned into echoes that everyone would hear. I knew this would not be easy. I had to keep my face calm, my heart steady. If they suspected my plan too soon, they could stop me. So I lived my days as if nothing was wrong. I spoke politely. I acted normal. Inside, though, I was sharpening the blade of truth. My silence was no longer weakness. It was camouflage. The third step was preparing the tools. I bought a small portable speaker, one that could connect to my phone easily. I tested it alone, making sure the sound was clear, sharp, undeniable. I listened to the recordings again and again, making sure the words could not be misunderstood. Their laughter, their confessions, their secret joy, all captured. Each time I replayed them, my pain turned into fuel. I reminded myself that when the world heard these voices, they would finally know the truth. As the day of the party approached, my heart beat faster. At night, I still felt the sting of betrayal, But now there was something else too: anticipation. I was no longer just a broken man lying awake in pain. I was a man with a mission. Every detail was ready in my mind. I would arrive quietly, blend with the crowd, wait until the music softened, until the attention was high. Then I would strike, not with fists, not with rage, but with truth played loud. I told no one, not a single soul. Plans whispered, our plans betrayed. I carried my burden alone because I knew only I had the strength to finish it. My wife had no idea. She thought her secrets were safe. My friend next door laughed freely, not knowing the storm was already at his door. They believed I was blind, broken, and weak. They had no idea that I was patient, watchful, and ready. Some nights before the party, I walked outside and looked at their house. I saw the lights on, heard faint voices, sometimes laughter. Once, that sound had been the music of friendship. Now, it was poison. But soon, it would all change. The same laughter would turn into silence, then into shame. They would know what it felt like to be exposed. They would taste the same humiliation they had fed me. In those final days, I did not see myself as a victim anymore. I saw myself as the judge. I was not going to shout, not going to argue, not going to beg. I was going to show. The proof would speak. Their voices would betray them louder than I ever could. My role was only to press play. And so, I waited. Patient, steady, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. The plan was set. The stage was chosen. The tools were ready. The time was near. They thought they had won, hiding behind lies and shadows. But I had built something stronger than their lies. I had built a truth they could never escape. And soon, at his own party, with his own guests watching, I would bring that truth to life. The night of the party came like any other celebration for them. Guests filled the yard, laughter rose under the lights, plates clinked, people moved from one group to another, talking about small things. He stood at the center, proud and smiling. My wife stood near him, light on her face, acting as if nothing in the world had changed. I walked in like a man who came for a visit. My steps were quiet. My face was calm. My hands felt heavy, but steady. I put the small speaker in my coat pocket and kept my phone in my hand. I moved slowly, blending with the crowd, taking the place of a simple guest. No one looked at me closely. They only saw a man who came to enjoy the night. I waited, watching the scene. Music played, people raised glasses. The neighbor told a small story, and the group laughed. My heart beat in my chest, but my face showed nothing. I watched their faces as they laughed, their smiles bright, unaware. For years I had been in their lives, a man who shared work and bread. Now I stood among them with proof in my hand. I thought of all the nights I had waited alone, the long hours of work, the silent pain that had become my companion. I thought of the times I had defended my friend in front of others, the many times I had called him brother. All those memories sat heavy and cold inside me. But I did not let them show. The night had to unfold in order, like a careful plan finally reaching its end. I moved closer to where most people had gathered. The living room doors were open, and the sound of music flowed out. I watched my friend talk with his guests. He was laughing and shaking hands like a king of a small world. My wife laughed with him, leaning in. They were close. The sight made a small fire flare in my chest, but I held it down. I remembered why I had prepared this night. I had proof. Their voices and messages would speak what my eyes already knew. I simply had to let the room hear what I had heard alone for months. The moment I chose was careful. I waited for the music to soften. I waited for the speeches and toasts to be done. I watched for the pause when the room would look up, when silence would make every ear sharper. When the attention was highest, I stepped forward. I did not shout. I did not call anyone out. I simply found a place where I could be seen and heard. I connected the little speaker to my phone. My hands did not tremble anymore. The long nights of pain had made my resolve solid. When I pressed play, the first sound did not surprise me because I had heard it in the dark 1,000 times. But to the room, the sound was new. Their own voices came through the small speaker, clear and raw. The words were plain. No drama, only truth. People turned their heads slowly. Confused faces changed into puzzled ones. Then the air shifted. My wife's face, for the first time since I had known her, went pale. She stood very still and looked at me. My friend froze mid-step, a smile falling from his face. The music seemed distant. The laughter stopped as if someone had cut it with a blade. The sound of their own secret exchanges filled the yard. Guests listened, then gasped. The room that had been full of chatter stilled into a strange silence. I watched the crowd. I saw recognition grow. People who knew some small rumors now heard the proof. Those who had trusted my friend began to question him. Those who loved my wife stared at her, stunned. Faces that once turned friendly toward them now drew back. People moved closer to hear more. I let the recordings play one by one. Each clip showed a piece of what I had lived with in silence. Each clip added weight. The small speaker held the power I had lacked when I first discovered the truth alone. The recordings did not shout. They did not plead. They only spoke facts, and facts are heavy when truth meets a room full of witnesses. The neighbor's family stood up. I saw their eyes narrow, their mouths tighten. They looked at the man they had praised, and the man looked small and lost. My wife tried to cover her face with her hands, but it was too late. The sound had already painted her actions in the air. The guests whispered and then spoke louder. Words like how and why moved from lips to lips. Some people left their chairs, moving toward the pair who had been caught. Others held their own children closer. The party felt like a small-town court where the truth was the law and each voice a witness. A cousin I had known for years grabbed my shoulder and whispered, not angry, but sorrowful. He said I had done what was right. The neighbor's old friends walked away in shame. The driver, not him now, but the friend next door, tried to speak, to explain, but people turned their backs. There was no room for his reasons, because the voice of evidence had already made them meaningless. His party had become his judgment. The roof of his small world had opened up, and the rain of truth poured in. I felt no joy in this. I felt only a strange emptiness mixed with relief. The plan had worked. The world that had hidden the betrayal now knew. The laughter had gone. The music had been replaced with a quiet that pressed on the chest. People who had once hailed my friend as a good man now looked at him with doubt. My wife could not stand steady. I saw the color leave her face as relatives confronted her. She had no answers that could erase what the room had just heard. The recordings had done what I could not do by myself. They had let everyone hear her own voice and his own voice together. Proof that betrayal had lived among us. When the last clip ended, no one applauded, no one smiled. People began to leave slowly, carrying whispers like heavy coats. Some came up to me and spoke softly, offering support. Others crossed the yard and demanded answers from them. My wife looked at me, eyes full of something I had never seen before. Fear, shame, and the knowledge that her acts had been shown to the light. The friend next door avoided my eyes. He had lost the armor of friendship. The party that was meant to be his stage had become his ruin. I left without a scene. I walked out as I had come in, quiet, calm, collected. My heart eased, not because I had hurt them, but because the truth had been heard. I did not need to shout. I did not need to fight. The recordings had spoken, and the room had listened. The party lights blurred behind me as I walked away into the night. For the first time in many months, I felt small relief. The truth had spoken loud, and I had made sure everyone heard it. The rest would follow on its own. The moment the recordings ended, the air in the room changed completely. What had been a celebration only minutes earlier had turned into a heavy silence. Guests stood frozen, glasses half raised, plates untouched. Faces showed disbelief, some wide-eyed, others pale. The words that played from the speaker lingered in their minds, louder than any music could have been. My wife stood stiff, her lips pressed tight, her eyes searching for a place to hide. The friend who had been proud only minutes before now looked like a man stripped of all defense. He shifted uneasily, his smile gone, his shoulders heavy. He knew that everyone had heard the truth, and no words could erase it. I looked around and saw the reactions one by one. Families who had once respected him stared with sharp eyes. Some women shook their heads, whispering to each other. Men clenched their jaws, disgust plain on their faces. My wife's relatives, who had welcomed her with warm arms, now turned cold. Some pointed fingers. Others sat in silence, unwilling to believe what they had just heard, but unable to deny it either. The betrayal was not a rumor now. It was not something hidden in shadows. It had been played out in clear voices, undeniable and real. Children who were old enough to understand clung to their parents, confused at why the room had grown so tense. Older guests muttered prayers under their breath, shaking their heads as if a curse had fallen on the house. Every whisper of laughter from the recordings now echoed in shame across the walls of the party. People who had thought they were celebrating now felt like witnesses to a trial. And in that trial, my wife and my friend were already judged guilty. My wife's face drained of color. She tried to step back, but the crowd was already circling her with their eyes. Relatives who had praised her beauty now saw her differently. They looked at her not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as someone who had broken the most sacred trust. My friend stood by her, his face twisted between anger and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but the murmurs of the guests drowned him out. His words would have no power anymore, because the recordings had already spoken louder than he ever could. One man at the party slammed his glass on the table, the sound sharp in the silence. Another shouted at my friend, calling him a liar. My wife's mother covered her face, sobbing quietly, unable to believe her daughter's shame. Her father stood still, his fists clenched, his body shaking, caught between anger and heartbreak. The family that had once been her shield now turned into her accusers. They felt the betrayal as their own, because I had been part of their family too. They saw my pain as proof of her crime. The guests whispered in every corner. Some spoke about how they had seen small signs before, how she smiled too often at him, how he visited too much, how her eyes followed him at gatherings. Others admitted they had ignored it, thinking it was harmless. Now, with the recordings, those small doubts became sharp knives of truth. No one could excuse it. No one could explain it away. The room was full of judgment, and none of it favored them. The shock spread fast, like fire on dry wood. People's expressions hardened. My wife and my friend stood in the center, stripped of dignity. They had nowhere to hide. Every eye in the room was on them, every mind filled with disbelief and disgust. The betrayal was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had heard their voices. It was shared among the guests, the families, the neighbors. The shame was heavy, and they carried it together. I did not need to say a single word. The truth had already done the work. My silence was stronger than their excuses could ever be. My calmness made the betrayal stand out even more. They had mocked me in secret, but now the world mocked them with the same silence that had once been mine. Their pride had been broken in one moment. Their secret pleasure had turned into public shame. The party that was supposed to celebrate friendship and joy had become a hall of judgment. The music had stopped, the dancing forgotten, the food untouched. Guests stood in clusters, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. My wife and my friend tried to move, but the crowd's cold eyes stopped them in place. They were trapped, not by walls, but by the truth. Their bodies looked small, their faces hollow, their pride gone. I watched quietly, my heart heavy but steady. The shock that filled the room was not mine alone. I had carried it for months, but now they carried it with me. I had lived with the pain in silence, but now it was spread to all who stood there. The burden was no longer mine. It belonged to them too. That was the power of truth. It did not destroy with fists or violence. It destroyed with light, exposing what had been hidden in darkness. And as the minutes passed, the shock turned into anger. Whispers turned into shouts. Respect turned into rejection. My wife and my friend were no longer seen as victims of weakness. They were seen as betrayers, unworthy of trust, unworthy of loyalty, unworthy of love. The shock of their exposure was the first step in their fall. And I stood there, watching, not with hatred, but with the calmness of a man who had let the truth speak louder than revenge ever could. The shock that filled the room did not stay silent for long. It began to break down the walls of dignity my wife and my friend had built for themselves. Their confidence collapsed, piece by piece, in front of everyone. What had been hidden pride became visible shame. What had once been secret joy now became public punishment. The collapse was slow at first, but it grew heavier with each passing moment, crushing them under the weight of exposure. My wife, who had once carried herself with grace and elegance, now looked broken. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes wet, her hands trembling. She tried to stand tall, but the crowd's eyes pushed her down. She could not find a corner to escape, because every corner was filled with whispers, stares, and judgment. Her collapse was not only in her body, but also in her spirit. The confidence that once made her laugh freely was gone. The pride that made her think she could deceive was destroyed. My friend, who had once walked proudly in front of neighbors, now stood with his head low. His chest that had always carried arrogance now sank inward. His body language told a story of defeat. He tried to form excuses in his mind, but none would come out. The crowd would not listen anyway. His reputation, once strong in the community, collapsed like a house built on sand. Years of pretending to be loyal and trustworthy disappeared in a single night. Their collapse spread into their families. My wife's parents, who had once been proud of her, now looked away in shame. Their heads bent low, unable to face their relatives. They felt the disgrace as their own, as if her actions had dragged them into the same pit. My friend's family, too, felt the weight. Brothers and sisters who had respected him could no longer hold their heads high. They, too, collapsed under the shame of being tied to him. Betrayal did not break only the betrayer. It broke everyone connected to them. The collapse was also social. Neighbors who once greeted my wife warmly would now turn away. Friends who once respected my friend would now keep their distance. The party was only the beginning, but the ripples would spread far. Word would travel from house to house, from street to street. People would talk about this night for years. Their names would no longer be remembered with kindness. They would be remembered for betrayal, for deceit, for shame. I stood quietly, watching. I did not need to push them further. The truth itself was enough to collapse everything they had built. Their laughter had collapsed into silence. Their friendship had collapsed into disgust. Their reputation had collapsed into dust. They were exposed, and there was no rebuilding what they had lost. The collapse also entered their private lives. Trust between them broke down as fast as their trust with others. My wife could no longer see my friend as her secret strength. He could no longer see her as his escape. What once felt like excitement now felt like chains. They had tied themselves to each other through betrayal. But once the world saw it, the chain became a burden. Even their bond collapsed under the weight of exposure. As they stood there in the hall, the collapse showed in every detail. My wife's makeup streaked down her face. Her dress that once looked beautiful now seemed heavy and unwanted. My friend's clothes that he had worn with pride now looked cheap and weak. The collapse stripped away every layer of false strength they had. They were left bare in front of everyone, not physically, but emotionally and morally. Nothing remained for them to hide behind. Some guests left early, unable to bear the sight. Others stayed, hungry to witness more of the downfall. The room itself seemed to collapse too. The decorations meaningless, the music pointless, the celebration destroyed. What was meant to be joy had turned into ruin. The house, once a place of friendship, now stood as a symbol of betrayal. I felt no need to raise my voice, no need to strike them, no need to humiliate them further. Their own actions had built the stage for their collapse. All I had done was shine a light on it. They had destroyed themselves, and I simply allowed others to see the ruins. That was the purest form of justice. The collapse reached its deepest point when silence returned to the room. After the shouting, after the whispers, after the pointing fingers, there was only quiet. My wife stood still, her body shaking. My friends' eyes were dark, empty of pride. The collapse was complete. They had lost their honor, their trust, their respect, their strength. All that remained was the memory of their betrayal. And I stood among them, not as a broken man, but as the one who had survived. Their collapse was not my fall. It was theirs alone. I had endured the pain in silence for months, but tonight, the silence belonged to them. And in that silence, the collapse of everything they once were was clear to all. When the collapse was complete and the silence had swallowed the room, I knew it was my moment to leave. I had no need to stay among the ruins of their pride. I had seen enough, heard enough, and felt enough. The revenge was already done, not with anger or violence, but with truth. Their voices had betrayed them, and those same voices had destroyed them. My work was finished. I turned toward the door with steady steps. My heart was calm, not racing like it had on sleepless nights. The storm inside me had already passed. I had carried pain like heavy stones for months, but now the weight was gone. The truth had lifted it from me. I did not need to explain myself, because the recordings had spoken louder than any words I could ever use. I did not need to argue, because there was nothing left for them to defend. As I walked through the crowd, people moved aside. Some looked at me with respect, some with sorrow, and some with quiet admiration. They saw not a man of rage, but a man of resolve. They saw a man who chose dignity over destruction. My exit was not a retreat. It was a victory march in silence. I had exposed lies, and that was enough. Behind me, I could hear the chaos begin again. My wife sobbing, my friends stammering, families arguing, voices rising. But I did not turn back. That noise was not mine anymore. It belonged to them, to the people who had chosen betrayal over loyalty. My silence was stronger than their screams. My calm steps were louder than their excuses. I pushed the door open and stepped into the night air. The cool wind touched my face, and it felt like freedom. For the first time in a long time, I breathed without the weight of suspicion. The stars above looked brighter, the world outside larger. The walls that once held my pain now held their shame. I had escaped. Walking away from that house, I did not feel regret. I did not feel the need to turn back and watch them fall further. I knew life would take care of the rest. Their names would echo in whispers of betrayal. Their faces would be remembered in shame. I had no part to play in that anymore. My path was separate, and my dignity was intact. I thought of my years of trust, my sacrifices, my devotion. None of it had been wasted, because it had shaped me into a man who could endure, who could survive even the worst betrayal. Their actions had tried to break me, but they had only broken themselves. My exit was proof that I had risen above their fall. Each step away from that house felt like leaving behind chains. The lies no longer bound me. The deceit no longer haunted me. I was free to rebuild, free to live with honesty, free to stand tall again. Revenge had not destroyed me. It had released me, and I carried with me not anger, but peace. By the time I reached the end of the street, the noise of the party was only an echo in the distance. Behind me was collapse. Ahead of me was clarity. My exit was not just from the party, it was from the shadow of betrayal. It was the start of a new life, one built not on lies, but on truth. And as I moved forward into the night, I knew this: revenge does not always need fire. Sometimes the sharpest weapon is silence. Sometimes the greatest strike is truth itself. I did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I only let the world hear it. And with that, my exit was complete. Now, as an old man, I look back on that night and on that chapter of my life with clear eyes. Time has softened the edges of my pain, but the memory is still sharp. Betrayal is not something you ever forget, but it is something you can rise above. I no longer carry the anger because anger is heavy. Instead, I carry the lesson because lessons make you lighter. I learned that people you trust the most can sometimes cut the deepest wounds. My wife was my partner, and my friend next door was like a brother. Together, they turned my faith into a weapon against me. But in the end, they did not win. Their secret joy was short. Their lies were temporary. Truth always waits, and truth always rises. When it rose, it crushed them, not me. That is why I speak of it today without bitterness. I remember how lonely the nights felt when I first discovered their betrayal. I thought the world had ended for me. I thought my dignity was lost forever. But I was wrong. Dignity does not vanish because of the actions of others. Dignity remains if you choose to hold it. And I chose to hold it. I did not fight them with fists. I did not burn my life down in rage. I stood with patience, I gathered proof, and I let the truth do the work. That is the lesson I keep even now. Silence is powerful. Many think silence means weakness, but it does not. Silence is the time when you prepare, when you plan, when you build strength. My silence before the party was not surrender, it was strategy. And when I finally broke that silence, it was not with shouting, but with facts. Facts do not need loud voices. Facts speak for themselves. That night, they spoke louder than any scream. Looking back, I also understand that betrayal is not the end of life. At first, it feels like your world has ended, but it has not. Life continues, and sometimes life even improves. Walking away from that party, I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong again. I had not lost myself. I had not lost my strength. I had not lost my dignity. What I lost were people who did not deserve me. And that is not a loss at all. It is freedom. As years passed, I built a new life, a quieter life, a life with peace. I did not chase revenge any further. I did not try to punish them beyond that night. I did not waste my future watching their downfall. I let time handle them, and time always does. Meanwhile, I focused on myself, on living honestly, on surrounding myself with people who valued truth. That choice gave me peace. Now, when younger men ask me about betrayal, I tell them this: you cannot stop people from being false, but you can control how you respond. Do not destroy yourself for their lies. Do not let anger eat you alive. Gather your strength, hold your silence, and let the truth come out. The guilty will always trip over their own lies. The innocent only need patience. I sit here today, not broken, but stronger. The pain once tried to bury me, but I used it as soil to grow deeper roots. Betrayal once made me doubt everything, but now it makes me value honesty more than ever. Betrayal once made me feel alone, but now I know I was never truly alone, because truth was always on my side. Final thought. They whispered in secret, thinking no one would hear. But I let the world hear them. And once the truth was out, I never needed to whisper again.